All right, so next thing we're going to be doing is our cylinder head disassembly. This will actually be a pretty quick video because there's not much to taking these cylinder heads apart. So let's go ahead and first identify the different components on this thing. This side of the cylinder head is the exhaust side. We can see that we've got a couple broken bolts in this cylinder head. I believe this front one, this back one, and then that one there. And that's pretty common for the GM. Actually GM, Ford, and Dodge all have issues with this. So we can see that they're broken off. Now we can see pretty closely that the exhaust here, this exhaust manifold bolt is broken off flush. This one is actually protruding a little bit. So we can, let's see if we can roll that in. You can see it kind of poking out there a little bit. This one will be easy to remove, and this one here will take a little bit more work to get out, and I'll be using a welder to get it out. So it's not a big deal for me, but some people tend to make life a lot harder on themselves whenever they're trying to remove broken bolts. There's a lot simpler methods than pulling out the old bolt extractor. So across the top of this cylinder head, we've got our valve springs. So we have actually 4 components exposed, actually 5 components exposed up here. We've got our valve springs, that's our springs right here. Our valve spring retainers, and then down inside the retainers are the valve locks, or valve keepers is what they're sometimes called. And each one has got the springs, the retainers, the keepers. And what we see sticking out on the very top of this is the actual valve itself. So we can see we've got our valve spring retainer, then our valve locks, which are inside here. There's 2 of them, there's a pair. And then what's exposed right here is the actual valve stem itself. You can see it a different shot there. Okay, so the way we're going to remove these is the more accepted way. Now there are people out there, and I've done it myself, I'm guilty of it, but if you take a socket and set it on top of the valve spring retainer and just hit it with a hammer. Now it has to be a large enough socket that the keepers will actually go up into the socket. So I've got a 1/2-inch socket here. If I set it up on top of this and I hit it, it will knock the keepers loose. So I'll go ahead and do one of them like this. When you're doing this, obviously you want to put on your safety glasses, but see, I've got got my hammer, it's just a brass hammer, and I'm just going to hit down against it. Now the thing that I don't like about this method is losing the keepers, because they'll launch everywhere, they'll come back up through the top of the socket. Now they do make tools for this, and what they have is on the inside there's actually a magnet that will capture it'll capture the keepers as they come out. But even then you could still lose your keepers, and they're small enough as it is, and I don't want to have to buy more if I don't have to. So I've removed this one valve spring and retainer and keeper assembly, and we see that we've got this valve, and I can just push it out from the back side and pull it out, and there we go, we've got a valve. So here's our valve. This is an exhaust valve, this happened to be the one that I grabbed. And we see that this exhaust valve has got a nice shiny section on it. That shiny section is the stem of the valve, and that's where it actually slides up and down inside the cylinder head valve guide. Okay, so there's our exhaust valve. Now the way I'm going to remove the remainder of these is using a valve spring compressor, and this is just a manual one. I do have an automatic one, or a pneumatic one, but because of the noise that it produces, I'm just going to go ahead and refrain from using it. So because this cylinder head has been together for a number of years, the keepers that are inside the retainer, they're locked in place, and they might be swedged in place to where I try to compress this spring and it doesn't want to go down. So to help that, what I'm going to do is take my hammer, and I'm just going to hit on the edge of the retainers just enough to knock them loose. So now I I'm not hitting it hard enough to bend or break the valve. I'm just hitting it enough that I can loosen the stiction caused by the many years of these things being cycled open and closed. To adjust my valve spring compressor, because I want to be able to compress the valve spring, but I don't need to compress the spring so much that it compresses too far. So let me try and orient this to where it'll kind of make some sense. Okay, so this is our valve spring compressor. This is a manual style. There's many different styles. Like I said, I've got a pneumatic one, but I decided not to use it. On this end right here, we have the foot that's actually going to go down against the valve spring here. And then we've got the side with the screw, and then there's a large foot that goes against the valve. So when I put this down against the valve, I want to make sure that I've got enough throw on it so that I compress the spring. But I only need to compress it enough to release the retainers. So let's see if we can get this in the shot. There we go. So hopefully just enough to compress. I'm going to pull on the lever. Now it feels like I'm going to be compressing it too much, so I'm going to back it off some. There we go. Try this. There. So you see that the retainer fell out, and the other one wants to fall out. There you go. We pull this one out. Keep track of the retainers. If it falls, make sure it falls somewhere you can find it. Don't let it fall down in the engine if you're doing this on the car. And then we have removed a valve spring retainer and 2 locks. So that's what we got. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so our next one, going to compress it again and then remove the valve locks. Pull them off, and you can stick them with a magnet, and then release the spring, and then off it comes. Okay. Let's do another one at a different angle. Get more of a side shot here. All right, so here we're doing the next one. Notice I'm putting the compressor down on the retainer. I'm squeezing it, and see how it released the locks? They just fall out, and you're ready to go to the next one. And you just have to do this over and over and over again 16 times until you have the cylinder head completely disassembled. Okay, all the way out to these 2 here. Now with the pneumatic one, it goes a lot quicker, but with a hammer and a socket, boy does it go fast. Just probably going to lose some sockets. You also run the risk of damaging the valves as you're doing it. All right, so let me go all the way back to this first one here, compress it, and we've got. All right, so we've got a cylinder head just about apart. We've got our last spring ready to come off. So we've got 8 springs, 8 retainers, and 16 valve locks. So just make sure, I always try to make sure that I go through them before I try and get them ready for cleaning, because the last thing I want to do is try and build an engine without all the parts present. Now, like I said, because this is an LS, a lot of things are very cheap, and valve locks are one of those things that are very cheap. So I've accounted for all 8 springs and retainers. And then for the keepers, that might be a different story. Got one here from the back side. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So it looks like we're doing good. All right, so the next thing that I want to do is push the valves out. I can just push them out from the top. And when I do that, I'm feeling like this one right here, it does not feel good. Something feels wrong about it because it didn't come out easy. It should just slide out. And I think what happened with this one is that, like I said, this engine was laying upside down and had water in it. I think water got into that valve guide and caused some rust. So all these other valves are coming out nice and easy. You can actually hear that they're creating a little suction. So we've got all of our valves out. There's our 8 valves, 4 intake and 4 exhaust. Okay, so there's all those. Stand them up. Now the next thing that I'd like to do is remove the valve stem seals. Okay. So to remove the valve stem seals, you can just use a regular pair of pliers, or if you do have some like this, these are actually valve stem seal remover pliers. There's all different types of them. I got these from a GM dealership shutting down with some other parts or other tools, and then just grab them and pull them off. And these are the valve stem seals. So because they've got a lot of oil underneath them, I'm going to go ahead and put them on my rag. Now these are just disposable. These will always get replaced during a cylinder head repair. If really, it's just recommended to replace them if you ever touch them. Okay, so we've got all of our valve stem seals out, and other than the broken studs in our valve guides, which we'll do during the machining video, this cylinder head's apart. And you see it didn't take very long, and honestly somebody could probably take maybe a few minutes to disassemble this head completely. And you know, it's not a very challenging job to do. Now this isn't indicative of all cylinder heads. There are some very complicated cylinder heads out there. Variable cam timing, variable valve lift, they're all going to be, they could be very difficult cylinder heads. So what I want to do is talk about the valve stem seal. Like I've got one right there. All right, so we have our valve stem seals, and we see that these have some buildup on them, and that's just the sludge that's happened over time. You can see we got a little bit of stuff built up on the top of it. But this is what's called a top hat style. There's top hat styles, metal clad, umbrellas, rubbers. There's different styles, and we'll talk about those too. But here's our first introduction to them. So this is a top hat style. It's a compliant rubber seal, or a Viton, or a fluoroelastomer, I think it is. But it also has what's called a garter spring around it, like a lot of shaft seals. It's got a spring that's going to help keep tension around the valve stem as this goes up and down. So the idea of this is that this valve is actually going up and down inside this stem seal, and it's basically wiping off excess oil as the valve strokes up and down inside the seal. The valve stem seals from the factory and OEM will be different for different applications. So we can see that that valve stem seal is black, and then we have this valve stem seal is orange. So we see we have a black stem seal and an orange stem seal. And in most cases, depending on what the colors are, there's almost always going to be a black stem seal, and black is going to go on the intake. You could have an orange, you could have brown, you could have gray, or a red, but the black one of the pair will almost always go on the intake valve. All right, so this disassembly, we can see the back end of our intake valves. You see they're really not too bad. You know, they're dirty, yes, but the cleaning, that'll help take care of this. We can see our valve stems are nice and clean. I don't know if there's any wear. It's very minimal if there is any wear in there. The spot where the valve blocks go, we see that on this valve it's actually got a groove cut into it, and on the inside of our valve block is a bead. And we'll get some close-up shots, but there's a bead that sits just like this on this it sits just like this on this valve, You can see it's got a bit of a wedge shape to it, and that's what keeps this whole assembly together. So that's cylinder head disassembly. The next thing that we're going to be doing is cleaning, and from there we're going to do cylinder head machining. We'll have that up and running this week, and yeah, that's all I got for you tonight. So I'll see you next time.